I will say that there is truth in the philosophy that the greatest benefits of your life happen through the biggest hardships that you face. The thing is, you just have to be willing to pause and take a step back and actually search for the gold nuggets in the river of you-know-what.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Plunzler. I'm a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, entrepreneur, and partner in an executive coaching company. I'm here today with Kate Germano, my business partner, a respected executive leadership coach, and board member of Veteran Business Project. In video one, Lynn Lauder, Dale Eisenberg, and Tracy Grant gave an overview of Veteran Business Project and what we do to help veterans and their family members purchase businesses. Today, we're going to discuss some of the very first things that you should understand before making the decision to go into business for yourself. These are the importance of getting really clear about your personal values and understanding your superpowers. The things you do better than most people that you know, the things that apply to your career and your business. So Kate, can you please introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, my name is Kate Germano, and I, as Joe mentioned, am involved in leadership coaching, and I'm on the board for the Veteran Business Project. So it's nice to see you.
Hey, thanks for joining us. First question is, what are our values?
It's a good question. Values are your compass. And so what we often find when we're working with people as coaches is that when they're experiencing distressing events in their lives, there's often a value at play where there's something conflicting with that value. So it's really important to get those clear right up front before we jump into any big business venture.
Awesome. And then what would your personal definition of values be?
I think they're sort of the guiding forces that we carry internally because of how we're shaped through our lives events and how we're raised. And those internal forces then influence our behavior. They influence decisions that we make, and they influence the relationships that we have. So again, really important to know internally who you are and what you're all about.
Definitely. Yeah. And as you know, I'm a huge nerd when it comes to values and values research. And I think the best definition I've ever found academically is transsituational goals, ordered in importance that serve as guiding features in people's lives. And that you hit all those three categories with your definition. So that's awesome. Why is it important to understand our personal values?
Well, I think anytime you experience a challenge, and I know this firsthand, anytime you experience a challenge with the work you're doing, if you trace that back by having a conversation with someone, when you observe yourself in that situation, what you often find is you're being asked to do things that are not commensurate with those guiding forces. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you are doing the best work you feel like you've ever done and you feel really inspired by that work, the opposite is true.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And, I know both you and I have attended various Georgetown programs to get certificates in facilitation, leadership coaching, and other programs. When we think about values, I remember coming across a C.S. Lewis quote that essentially said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And I don't know if you find it in your interactions with clients in your practice, but like how many people can't really define what their values are or even define the term. And we use these terms all the time. So do you find that in your practice?
I do. And oftentimes people don't even understand what drives their own behavior. So I think that growing self-awareness by better understanding self is a primary step that you have to have in order to really find the thing that most fulfills you in life to do.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think, where we're driving at with this conversation about values is once you understand what your values are, you're going to be in a much better position to determine like what kind of business you want to bring into the world.
For sure.
And so you mentioned earlier, Kate, about how values might conflict with each other or complement each other. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, in terms of conflicting with the work that you do, I think that we often join organizations or we become part of an organization and we believe that the organization's values are one thing. And then when we get there and we jump in, we find out something very different. And when that happens, you may find that you struggle to feel inspired about going to work. You may find that you have low energy throughout the day because of the work. And oftentimes there's a direct connection there. Whereas on the other hand, if you recognize what drives your work and what makes you feel most motivated and fulfilled in life, you're going to have more energy by joining an organization or being a part of an organization or business that nests with those values, because there's no gap there. There's nothing that you have to compensate for and create a sort of like a false energy to do. There are.
Yeah, it's like that false motivation, right? That always rings hollow.
Yeah.
How many times in the Marine Corps did you hear that?
Always.
Somebody's spouting off at that. Yeah. But, as we're thinking through values and how they can compete and conflict with each other, a lot of times there's a competition between like how much we want things to stay the same and be predictable. And those values are kind of as opposed to how much change and stimulation and new things do we want in our life. So there's a dynamic tension across that. But also kind of like, what are we doing for ourselves? Do we want power, achievement, the ability to influence the world and others? And then how much do we want for other people? And whether that's like our own group of people or more broadly, like what's good kind of for everybody. So yeah, absolutely. Like there's, different human values, and especially from like the research perspective, which I promise I won't nerd out on today or get into, but yeah, definitely competing and conflicting values definitely do exist. And also the other important thing to think about is that we pursue multiple values at different times, both in our lives presently, but they'll also change over time. I mean, think about like what you cared about when you were 18 is probably very different than what you care about now. That we both retired out of the Marine Corps and gone into business. So, and which is probably a good segue to the next thing. When you think about your decision to start your own business, right? And I know you got out of the Marine Corps in 2016. You did the nonprofit leadership route for a little bit, and then you went into the corporate side. But ultimately, you settled on paving your own path and launching your own business. Could you talk to me about like how your values influenced that decision?
I knew at the time that I wanted to be a part of something bigger than what I felt I was in the corporate sector and in the nonprofit sector. And I had that same inspiration in joining the Marine Corps. So that's pretty much been a consistent theme in my life. And I thought, what better way to take that value and align it with the work that I want to do than by helping people learn from my mistakes so that they didn't repeat them in their own leadership roles. So that was what led me to creating a business. And it fit really well with another value that I had of autonomous work. I want to be a leader in my own right. I don't want to have to report to anyone above me. Yeah. And that, again, when you're operating in an environment like the Marine Corps, you don't really have that opportunity. So you can see where conflict would arise there. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize it until much later in my career that was even a thing and it was happening. But that's why I'm here.
Yeah, no. And when you think about like going into business for yourself, it's also often been said it's not for the faint of heart, right? It's as opposed to a workplace, and we both had jobs, after we got out of the service, where you have a structure, there's an architecture, there's a hierarchy, there's a boss. That boss typically has a boss. That boss typically has a CEO in charge of them. When you go into business for yourself, it's you, and it's all entirely you. So I think for some people that would absolutely scare the bejesus out of them, but for people who have like a high priority and really index hard on things like autonomy and independence and adventure, it could be a really attractive proposition for folks seeking that type of thing. And so, yeah, I think when you think about like change in life and your tolerance for change, how would that inform a decision to go into business?
Well, I think this is why leadership coaching for people who are exploring this opportunity is so important, because if you don't know yourself and what drives you and brings you the most energy and fulfillment, then you may get yourself into something where you're way over your head. And I'll give you an example. So if you are an extrovert who gets energy from interacting with people all day, every day, then entering into a business where you're just one of, and there are no other employees and there's really no customer interaction, you're just dealing with widgets, for example, or technology, you may quickly find that you burn out and that you can't be successful in that environment. So really being aware of what drives you, including knowing your values, but also knowing whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, or you're a morning person or a day or evening person. All of those different facets of self will really create a compass or a waypoint for you to use as you're searching for the right opportunity for you in the business sector.
Definitely. Yeah. As you contemplate what kind of business you want to start, it may not be you as a solo entrepreneur. It could be with a team of founders too. And probably super important at the beginning of that relationship to know your own personal values, right? But also that of your partners, to see where you have complementary values and where conflict might lurk.
That's
And
right.
not that conflict's necessarily a bad thing, but like the management of the conflict, as you often say, could be constructive or destructive, right? But based on those very deep-seated value sets. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you're right on target, Joe. And it's interesting because when I think about what you just said, the thought that occurs to me is that most of the time when there's interpersonal strife,
Yeah.
people assume it's just because people can't get along. But when you peel back the layers of the onion and you dissect kind of that idea, what we often find more often than not is there's a lack of clarity around some major issue, whether it's goals, roles, processes, or in this case, values, and whether they're in sync with each other and they complement each other, or they're opposing forces. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And now that I think about it, like when you think about all the different people that we know that have started their own company, right? In your case, you wanted to use your past experiences to help other people really close that gap between where they are in life now and their future potential. We have another friend who's started an AI business and wants to, apply that to valuation of data, things like that. But when you bring a company into the world, or you buy an existing company and put your own stamp on it, you're really trying to create something meaningful, right? And it typically for veterans, it's more than just a transaction. And there's nothing wrong with making money, right? Like selling a product or a service to make a buck, totally fine. But a lot of folks don't find that to be enough, especially, people who have gone into the military and come out or are looking for something that has a little bit deeper sense of meaning. And being clear about your values and your partner's values could also help you inform what kind of corporate values or company values you want to create, especially if you're going to hire other people to do work. And the other thing too is I think, Kate's spot on. Like by understanding yourself and your own personal values, you're going to be able to answer that trifecta question. And, how many times have you talked to veterans who are getting off of active duty, they're looking for what to do in their next pivot. And, we have conversations with them about, well, you got to figure out where to live. So location, occupation, and what you want to do, whether that's work for somebody else or go into your own business, and compensation, right? Like how much money do you need to make to stay afloat and be profitable and prosperous going forward? The fourth thing that we often talk to veterans about is laying all that on a foundation of meaning, right? It's like, what are you trying to bring into the world? What are you trying to manifest in order to make the world a better place? And really that all comes down to values and how we see them. Any other thoughts on that before we start moving into uncovering superpowers?
No, let's do it. I think that they nest very well together.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, one of the most powerful things I did when I was getting out of the Marine Corps was to go to a leadership seminar. It wasn't through TAP or anything like that. It was actually through a Korn Ferry, led by a mutual friend of ours, Noah Rabinowitz. And one of the most powerful things they had us do at the very start of contemplating leaving the military was get really clear on our values and get really clear on our superpowers. And they actually had us get our values down to 3. And, whether that's using like the Discover Your Values assessment that's available online, or actually before you switch into superpowers, like you actually, when you work with your clients, have a method for determining their values. And how do you go about doing that?
I do. So it sounds very simple. And the idea is that they use this thing called the Harvard Good Project, has a value sort activity online. And what it requires you to do is sort from a list of, I think, 30 or 40 different words. No definitions are there. And first you start by selecting your top 10, and then you roll down your top 10 to your top 4. Then you have to select your bottom 10, the least important to you, and then whittle those down to your least favorite 4. So that's the process that we use. And then the client will come back to me with their lists, and we will refer back to them throughout the course of their coaching work, because oftentimes they're popping up without the client even being aware, and they are able to connect how their values, whether top 4 or bottom 4, are actually influencing their communication, influencing their actions, influencing their relationships.
Yeah, now I have to steal that resource from you. We'll actually post it on this video. So both Kate's method for helping clients discover their values, and also the assessment that I use with my clients through discoveryourvalues.com. And there's a million different ways to do it, but I think we just want to help you find a way that's right for you. But each of us have unique talents, and sometimes we do them so well we don't even realize or fully appreciate how amazing we can be. One of the things that we'd like to talk about today is really 5 tactics you can use to discover your superpowers. And then we're going to talk about how to combine this knowledge with your values in a way to really dial in your business search. So before we get down to tactics, I'm curious, Kate, how did you figure out what you were really good at?
I figured it out by truly by accident. And I will say that there is truth in the philosophy that the greatest benefits of your life happen through the biggest hardships that you face.
Yes.
So the thing is, you just have to be willing to pause and take a step back and actually search for the gold nuggets in the river of what. So that's actually how I came to this work. It's very personal to me. It means a lot to me. It's very purpose driven, and I love seeing my clients learn and grow. There's nothing more fulfilling than when they have an aha moment because of a very simple question that we might have asked in a session. So that's how.
Yeah, no, I love that, because that really fits into, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you model of thinking, right? And even Lynn Lauder, who runs Veteran Business Project, is famous for saying, every once in a while, life puts you down in the valley. And he said, when you're in that valley, he said, that's when you find your character.
Absolutely.
And I absolutely believe that. So, that's one way of thinking about what you're good at, is think about the times that you were really pressed, right? And really struggled, and what you learned from those experiences and how you emerged from that more resilient, stronger, better, faster, is one way. Another way you could kind of think about it is, what's the path of least resistance, right? What happens in nature, energy flows in the path of least resistance. So the things that really come easy to you and naturally, right? That other people come to you for help with because you do them so well, could be another way. So I think, you could kind of look at this on several different levels. And we're going to explore a few of these different lenses that you could take a look at. So when you think about your coaching clients, Kate, how do you help them get clear about what their top skills are?
I think it becomes easier for someone to understand what they're naturally gifted at when they receive feedback from other people. So I think one of the most valuable things that we can do as coaches is reflect back to our clients what we hear them say, what we see them do in a session. I think that's one way, but I think the other way is to really help them solicit people they know so that they can find those golden nuggets. Because oftentimes, like you said, Joe, we're good at things, but we have a blind spot because we may not feel we're confident in doing those things, but other people think we're amazing at them. So I think asking people for feedback is a really important way to sort of build our inventory of what we're good at, those superpowers.
Definitely. And how many times have we had conversations about hidden talents? I wonder, God, what thing would I be really good at if I just tried it? Right?
Well, just a note on that, Joe, I think it's really important to just pause there and give one point. And that is that there are oftentimes things that we're very good at that we may assume everybody's good at them.
Yeah, right.
And so there's a missed opportunity there. And sometimes having a neutral person as a coach who really doesn't know you except for the sessions, highlighting during the session what they hear and see.
Yeah.
can lead you to understand, wow, that is really something that I am very good at that maybe other people aren't. And that can be an avenue to finding the right line of business for you as well.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say, if I understand correctly, is that you're getting clients to think about their past experiences, their work, their hobbies or activities, things that they've enjoyed and excelled at or struggled at and learned from. And then think it through, like, what about those things do they find stimulating, engaging, rewarding? Do I have that correct?
Absolutely. And then, just helping them see that maybe sometimes the things that they take for granted are the things that other people struggle with and
Yeah.
could use their help with.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think the other thing too, there's a difference between kind of just sitting and thinking about these things and holding them in our head, but like when we ask people to actually make a list and write those things on paper, how does that change the way we think about our values or our superpowers?
Well, it's an analytical activity, right? So when you think of how the brain is constructed, there are two networks. There's the analytical network, which is where facts, figures, lists exist. And then on the other part of the brain and the other network, it's basically where relationships happen, where collaboration happens and good teamwork. And so it's a way to take the more emotive things that happen in that part of the brain and putting them down on paper actually makes it concrete. So it's a way to help you transition a feeling about what inspires you, what motivates you into an actual action. So it's a really good activity.
I love that. So you're taking it from the emotional center of the brain and really putting it up in the rational center of the brain to help, create plans around those things, right?
That's right. It's a way to create a path towards that goal.
Love it. Love it. And I remember one time you told me, I was transitioning over to the idea of asking other people for their thoughts. And you mentioned a French Enlightenment philosopher named Voltaire, and he said something about mirrors. Could you tell us that quote for the audience?
Well, Voltaire once said, "A mirror is a useless invention. The only way to truly know yourself is to have you reflected in the eyes of someone else." Words to that effect. And I thought, wow, that is such a perfect way to capture why coaching is so valuable, because we oftentimes have no idea how we come across and emotionally impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And how really there's multiple versions of ourselves. I mean, there's the self that we think we are. There's a self that other people see.
Yeah.
Both of those perceptions can be true at the same time, but you're also talking about the self that we don't really know, right? Like the blind spots that we have. So either good or bad, right? Things that we do well that we're not super aware of, or things that we don't do so well that we're also not super aware of. So I think
that's why getting that feedback from other people in a really contained way and a secure feeling way is a great opportunity, because it helps us see, wow, there are things that I'm really good at that maybe I'm not confident doing, but other people think I'm amazing. And so it can broaden your perspective about your superpowers and how you can be successful in the business world.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the ways that you can collect that data is just sit back and think about like 5 people that you respect that are invested in your future success, right? And then go to those people and ask them for feedback. And, questions like, and ask deliberate questions, things like, what do you think I do better than most people?
Mm-hmm.
What skills do you see me excelling at? What do you think my superpowers are? And see what they say. I mean, I think you might be surprised at some of the findings.
Absolutely. And then just one more question you might want to ask them as you're thinking about closing that gap between your public and your private personas is really, hey, what are 5 or 6 words that I use to describe myself?
Yeah.
What are 5 or 6 words that you would use to describe me, particularly under stress? Right. And then if there's a gap there or there's overlap, you'll see there are maybe areas to grow and learn, or there may be areas, like we said, where you have a blind spot towards doing things well that you want to aware of.
Yeah. And I love that. And so I think, one, you probably want to preface it with people saying, hey, I'm trying to do some, reflection work on my life and where I want to go. I've got some questions for you that are really going to help me dial in what I think my skills are. Could I ask you these questions, rather than just hitting them out of the blue with, 5 or 6 strange questions like, hey, tell me all the things that you love about me. Right?
Yeah.
So, like, what do I do well? What do I, where can I probably have the biggest potential for growth? What might I not be seeing about myself? Things like that. Right. And third, I think, when I was doing my research for today's broadcast, I was thinking through like another way. And I think, really you talked about self-awareness and really kind of stepping outside of ourselves to observe ourselves is a super important thing to do. And when I got out of the Marine Corps, I thought that was a little bit woo-woo, but the more I've delved into it and really followed your example, the more I see the value of that, right? Because if you start to pay attention to what energizes you and notice like what pulls you and what repels you, right? The things that you want to do and the things that you don't want to do, the things that give you energy and the things that drain energy from you, that's super important information, right? Because, if, ultimately I think in business, right, you want to be able to do the things that only you can do and the things that you love doing, and the things that you don't want to do, you need to be, one, cognizant of if you're a solo entrepreneur, but two, those are probably the things that you would want to hire other people to do if you were going to build a business that was bigger than just yourself.
That's right. It's really, really important to know that. I mean, just coming at this from the stance of, does working with people all day drain me? Or is it something that I wake up in the morning and I don't even need an alarm clock because I'm so excited and I get to interact with all these different people today? Just that one thing, knowing that about yourself, is super, super valuable.
Yeah, and I think it's part of the secret sauce to happiness within entrepreneurship. Exactly as your point. But also like understanding like the things that attract and repel you and writing those down on a list, right?
Absolutely.
Looking at trends among them, or on the calendar to see how do you behave in the things that attract you and push you away. A lot of times those can be good indicators of your natural talents and strengths as well. A fourth thing I found out was taking a look at your academic and professional success, right? So kind of reviewing your grades in school and your transcripts and notes from your teacher, but also, the fitness reports that you got while you're in the military, and how could that inform what kind of business I want to start today? What should I look for there?
Rewards and awards. I mean, just think about awards. Awards are supposed to be to reward you for and recognize you for the things that you really excelled in. And they may have been things that you you just took them for granted because you thought they were your job. And so that's great sources of feedback.
Yeah, definitely. And then Kate, the last thing I thought about, so with 5 techniques, was that taking an online assessment, right? And I know a lot of those online skills discovery assessments are not free. They cost a little bit of money, but I think they also do provide people an easy way to get fast insight. And typically they come in the form of some sort of online survey instrument. And I know one of the ones that a lot of folks at Georgetown and in our network use is the Clifton Strengths Assessment. I haven't dabbled with it. I don't know if you have, or if you know of any other online assessments for strengths.
Well, I want to be, I want to just be very open-minded about assessments, because I think the most important assessments that you can take are those that are behavior related,
right? Because
it will allow you to decide what you want to keep doing and what you want to learn to do better. And so I like the Clifton Strengths Finder. It's good. But I also think what ends up happening is oftentimes we over leverage or we over rotate on a strength. And when we do that, it becomes a weakness.
Right.
So the Clifton Strengths Finder, the philosophy there is that you take the list of strengths and you channel your energy to do those things, or to do actions that produce those types of feelings. Mm-hmm. The challenge is if you only take that snapshot in time, you may miss some other key areas that you could learn to do differently. So I like to take a variety of different sources, a variety of different assessments.
So smart. Yeah, and that's so smart because you're right. These things are diagnostics. Like you look at the dash of your car and you see like, I'm at, 5,600 RPMs and going 100 miles an hour, right? Like,
I hear clients say all the time, well, that's just who I am.
Yeah.
And it's, well, your DNA is who you are, but your behaviors are not your DNA. So you just have to be willing to tweak your behavior to get different results.
Yeah.
So we can learn new things until the day we die. And I think that's one of the greatest parts about coaching.
100%. Especially like starting a business, you're going to learn a lot about yourself if you choose to go down this path.
And it may not always feel good what you learn.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, like I think, there's a way of thinking about that learning in terms of like success and failure is a really based way of doing it. But I find, and tell me if you agree with this or not, like another way of looking at it is experimental. Like, what did we try that yielded results that we can learn from? And then what can we try that we would do differently next time to see if we can get different results? And, I think I think people tend to be a lot happier and more creative in the experimental mode than they are in the judgment mode. And I know you talk a lot about self-judgment, and especially with high-performing individuals, how debilitating that can be. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, as you were talking, that was exactly what popped into my mind, because particularly in the military, many people who are in the military are hyperachievers.
Yeah.
Right? That means they're always looking for the next big thing to achieve. They're always looking to, I do this goal, I achieve this goal, then I'm going to move on to a bigger goal. And that can be a challenge for people if they're not willing to learn new ways of sort of looking at self and understanding there are other facets to human existence that don't require you to go from one goal to the next goal to the next goal to the next goal. Some things, like owning a business, are about finding what you love, doing what you love and inspires you and makes you feel good about what you're giving to the world. And maybe you do that for the rest of your life, but you don't always need to be that hyperachiever and evaluating yourself against statistics and other people, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think, as you're talking, the other thing that came to mind was that in the military, you get a ton of feedback, right? Mm-hmm. You have rank on your collar, where you sit in the tribe, you have fitness reports, you have, counselings, there's a ton of, I think, both qualitative and quantitative feedback. And you may disagree, but I think more so than you get out in the entrepreneurial world, right? Like,
well, that is true.
Is you get a lot of external measures of success in the military because people are telling you, here's the exemplar, the closer you fit this model, the more you're going to get rewarded, right?
That makes total sense.
So there's external metrics of success and happiness in the military, I think a lot more. When you're in the entrepreneurial space, if you try to apply those same metrics to success and happiness, I think you're going to be really miserable, right? Because
yeah, absolutely, Joe. And I'm going to cut you off, but I think that this is a great tie-in to the values discussion that we had earlier. That the more you can tie how you view yourself and your achievements and associate those back to your values, the better off you're going to be, because you're not going to have those extrinsic sources of feedback along the way like you do in the military, to your point. Yeah.
I mean, you're going to have to ask yourself, like, how do I define happiness? How do I define success, right? Because you're starting this business, for you, typically to bring a product or service into the world, to solve some sort of problem or help people. And this is kind of like a really good point for us to kind of wrap this all up. I mean, there was a Spanish philosopher named Zucinaga who put together like what is called the happiness model. And he said, if you know what you love to do, right, which is, for lack of another term, values, and you know what your skills are and the things that you're good at, so our superpowers, right? Like where those things overlap on the Venn diagram, it's probably a really good place to start looking for your career 2.0 or your next career pivot if you've already left the military. But to make a business, we need to answer two more questions, right? The first question is, you have to have something the world needs, right? Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, they've got to be willing to pay for that thing. So if you've got values, superpowers, a need, and something that they're willing to pay for, you've got a business, right? Potential for it. Any final thoughts on that, Kate? Like, before we wrap up today, we talked a lot about it, we covered a lot of ground. So any parting thoughts for folks who might
be I would love to tie this back to the value of the veteran business program or project, because I think that first and foremost, the partnership that you get in trying to find businesses that already exist, so that you can take ownership of those, really satisfies one of the three questions, if not two of the three questions, right? It's not going to tell you what your superpowers are, but it is going to tell you if people are willing to pay for a service that you could potentially offer. So I think the Veteran Business Project is so important because it helps people close the gap on finding businesses where there's already a demonstrated, people will pay for this, and here's what the market will bear.
Right. Yeah. And beyond that, like also, is owning a business right for you is the first question we get asked. And is it right for you now, right, at this point in your life? Because you may have an entrepreneurial flame burning in your heart, but might not have all the pieces in place, to launch today, which doesn't mean that you're a bad person, doesn't mean that you're a failure. It means that like keep stoking that fire and figure out like how can you get to that point in the future. And then for other people who are like, whoa, like I really want to be able to work with other people in some sort of hierarchy and have a lot more prescriptive stuff.
Did you clear?
Yeah, maybe it's not for you. And again, if you decide that business is not for you, congratulations, you discovered something about yourself, and you've probably done yourself a favor and probably taken a much less expensive route, to prosperity, because it's just like one route. Like find a job, work for somebody else, okay. But if you want to drive your own ship, if you have high autonomy values, high sensation seeking, adventure, like are in your mix, you probably ought to give it a serious look, because I think, it's like boldly going where few people have gone before, right? And,
I would offer too, Joe, that, we've got Lynn Lauder, who we love dearly, right? And he's a great example of how even if, ownership of a business isn't possible now, we can learn new things till the day we die, right? So you may find that you hit 60 and all of a sudden the time is right. So never fear if entrepreneurial characteristics are in your blood. If now is a good time, never count out owning a business, because it could happen a year from now or 30 years from now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we don't get to choose our epiphanies. They kind of find us, and finally the light bulb goes on. But what a great discussion. I really enjoyed talking to you today, and thanks for helping us dial in both our values and our superpowers and providing people tools and resources to do that.
Yeah, keep up the good work. It's a great organization.
Awesome. All right, so here we are with Kate Germano, legendary executive leadership coach and Marine Corps veteran, and I'm Joe Plensler, entrepreneur, leadership coach, and also a Marine Corps veteran, and we're signing off. Thanks so much, Kate.
Take care.